What you got there? Sausage? Where'd you get it? You know that trench raid we just did last night? There was a whole bunch of this stuff right next to the rats. I don't think they ate it though. I think it's okay. Yeah.
Wait, is it German?
Yeah?
Oh, you
Why?
Oh, no. You gotta watch out. They put weird stuff in that.
No.
Yeah. Like it really makes the guts go, sideways.
I better not eat too much. That.
Ooh. Ooh.
Oh. You are kidding. Ooh. Oh my God!
Wow.
What? This stuff doesn't take too long to have an effect.
You're
eh?
disgusting.
God, Jesus. Whoa. Whoa. Better get this down my neck.
Honestly, really. You stink.
God.
Hello, dear viewers. It's March. And because you're all such wonderful patrons and supporters of the channel, you'll know exactly what this is all about. So I won't bore you with some sort of long-winded, overworded preamble. Yeah? It's the Cabin Fever Challenge. The Cabin Fever Challenge is the greatest shooting challenge in all of Christendom. And this year,
You must shoot the Cabin Fever Challenge.
With a herring!
hey, stop that! That's silly! Honestly, we're going to shoot it with the Ross. Only this year, there's going to be something extra special to go with it. And I'm not particularly looking forward to it.
Now, the Mark III Ross had a very, storied, troubled, marred, tainted, stained, and short service life. It was first issued in 1914 and was basically withdrawn from frontline service in 1916, just thereabouts the beginning of the Battle of the Somme. That said, it does hold a place right next to another aspect of warfare, which is possibly the most unpleasant, if that can actually be a thing. That's right, gas. Now, the PH hood was introduced in late 1915 and served into 1917 as a backup. And it consisted of basically a flannel bag, in the case of the PH hood, with a couple of eyepieces and an exhalation valve, which is that piece of rubber there below the eyepieces. Yeah, it's about as unpleasant as you can imagine. And as I mentioned, I'm just not looking forward to this. That said, I've never really used it against the clock in a challenge such as this. And, I hope you'll enjoy the trials and tribulations that I'm probably going to have to, for the love of God, do this pouch up. Oh, God. Enfield, get a grip. Right. Let's do some shooting. As a quick recap, for the Cabin Fever Challenge, the Ross fits into Division 7, or manual repeating classic irons, as would most military bolt-action rifles. The course of fire is simple, though more on that later, and the time and hits on the 8-inch round target are entered into the formula to get the score. The ammunition I used for this year's Cabin Fever Challenge was S&B 180 grain full metal jacket. These, just like Mark VII service ammunition, were loaded into 5-round chargers. So with my decision to wear a respirator for this year's shoot, there was some degree of managing expectations to be had. The claustrophobic nature of what is a double-layer flannel bag over the head, and the reduction in airflow, coupled with the lenses that would invariably fog, were going to make for an interesting effort. The PH helmet introduced an improvement in an exhalation valve which was held in the mouth and only allowed for air to be blown out. This was definitely an improvement over earlier designs in that it kept one's warm, moist breath from adding to the fogging issues. So it's very much a in through the nose, out through the mouth type of rhythm. Of course, the helmet is a reproduction, and this was to have, shall we say, interesting consequences. Firstly, the lenses are spaced somewhat farther apart than the original, which is fine when standing still, but necessitates near constant adjustment when shooting. Another aspect presented itself just as I was about to begin, and this was to have disastrous consequences. Now for me, one of the biggest considerations of firing the Ross in a situation such as this was not the historical jamming or the unwieldiness, both of which I've covered before in other videos, but especially for a shoot such as the Cabin Fever Challenge, was the reload. The Ross suffers, in my experience, from a chronically finicky and unreliable charger guide arrangement and complicated and equally finicky magazine construct. When combined, they lead nearly invariably to botched magazine charging. They never seem to roll off the charger easily, and frequently everything gets jammed up, with loose rounds falling off the charger and fouling up the works. As we'll soon see, the Ross didn't disappoint, or rather, performed to expectations. As I was adjusting the helmet, which was worn without headdress by regulation even in the era of the steel helmet, I grabbed the right lens. Most disappointingly, it fell off in my hand, it having detached from the fabric. This led to about 45 minutes of faffing around attempting to apply a solution. I became increasingly frustrated and somewhat despondent, as although I didn't need the thing to actually shoot, this was the whole purpose of doing the Cabin Fever Challenge this year in this way in the first place. Eventually, I found an ancient roll of duct tape deep in that spot under the car seat, along with the lost candies, gum wrappers, and a strangely large number of pens. I used a thin strip of this to fix the eyepiece, but here we must pause. In my extremely frustrated state, amplified by a 2-day ordeal of a magnitude seldom experienced to make a simple shooting video, I was to lose focus and make a grievous error moving forward.
A little longer than a few minutes later.
Having finally fixed the lens, I walked back to the firing point and promptly lay down. The astute amongst you will immediately identify the issue. The Cabin Fever Challenge is shot first from the standing position. Indeed, it was in this position that saw the eyepiece detach as I was about to begin. Not at any time did that little voice in my head say, "Stand up, you donkey." So it was to be that all the effort to make this happen would be null and void. The funny thing is that I didn't even realize I had made the mistake until I got home and started thinking about it. So, ineligible for entry into the challenge though this may be, perhaps some interest and benefit can be had from the generalities observed in this modified Cabin Fever Challenge. As I began, in somewhat blissful ignorance to my error, the familiar characteristics of the Ross became apparent. First is the relatively slick action. Now, this only becomes apparent when you work the bolt with a degree of hairy-assed manliness. If you baby it, the action will feel clunky and stiff. As a result, the subsequent energy on cocking throws the brass some distance to the right. As I went for that first reload, as you can see, I went for the wrong pouch. Had they all been full, this would not have been a problem, but as it was, the degradation in vision and awareness offered by the hood played its role here. Then, as I was loading, the charger fouled, true to form. I ended up placing the last 3 rounds in the magazine singly. So efficient. In moving to the kneeling position, the hood required adjustment to align the eyepiece so I could shoot. The sights on the Ross are quite good, though mine has a front sight that appears to have been modified to a degree by having the tapered upper portion of the barleycorn filed off, leaving what amounts to a thick blade sight. As it is, the width of the sight goes nicely with the 8-inch target at 100 meters or yards. The second reload had its own issues. The round slipped off the charger well enough, but then the last one went in behind the fourth, resulting in a spot of rim jam. With service ammunition and its radiused rim, this wouldn't have been a problem, but commercial ammunition doesn't have that, and the Ross is quite sensitive, so it let me know. By this point, breathing was becoming a bit of an issue, and exhaling out of a small tube that itself was capped with a double check valve was starting to become somewhat uncomfortable. In addition, the heat inside from my head was starting to condense on the eyepieces. The third reload was only marginally better, and still the rounds didn't slide in as one might hope. I did, however, end up in the position that I was supposed to be in, the sitting. I elected for the heels dug in version versus the legs crossed. There happened to have been a small rise that I was shooting on that lent well to this position. While the position was comfortable enough, I was detecting somewhat of a breeze. Maybe that helped distract me from my ever-increasing want of air. By the time it was all said and done, my body was definitely letting me know that it was not happy with its reduced levels of oxygen. Now, this was from simply shooting from static positions, albeit in a target shooting application, but I was glad that the cabin fever challenge was not the cabin fever running challenge. I did have plenty of that in previous projects. Perhaps a formality given my botched effort, scoring was thus.
Well, off the bat, that is way better than I was anticipating. Let's count them up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. So all the hits are there. 12 hits. So, yeah. Grouping's not too bad either. I'd say, within 10 inches or so. Of course, that doesn't matter. But 12 solid hits, yeah. With this stupid thing, I'm more than happy.
Now, if that's not an indication that I really had no idea I had screwed up, I don't know what would. So the 12 hits were combined with a time of 2 minutes 46 seconds, or 166 seconds. And when plugged into the cabin fever formula, gave 36 points. So the sting of making such a ridiculous error is still there. But I can take solace in the fact that the underlying aim was achieved. It wouldn't be British muzzleloaders without a bit of history, so perhaps a brief comment on the rifle and equipment used. The Mark III Ross was issued in Valcartier, Quebec, to what became the 1st Canadian Division in 1914. The division sailed to England and then trained over the winter on Salisbury Plain. It landed in France in February 1915 and was in the line shortly after that. Its first major battle was at Second Ypres in April 1915, where it held the line during the infamous German gas attack. Immediately following the cessation of that battle, the men and units of the division quietly began taking Lee-Enfields into service. The Ross's many faults were shown to be a liability. The full story of the Ross is discussed in detail in an earlier video. By June of that year, official steps were taken to re-equip the Canadian Division with the British service rifle. This was done, but the subsequent Canadian divisions, the 2nd, 3rd, and eventually the 4th, arrived later, beginning in late 1915. They continued to be armed with the Ross. Finally, in May of 1916, Haig ordered the Canadian divisions in the field, the 2nd and the 3rd, to rearm, and although the newly arrived 4th Division still had the Ross in July of 1916, it too had been rearmed by September, prior to its commitment in the Battle of the Somme. As you have seen, I've used the 1908 pattern web equipment for this year's shoot. This was used by the 1st Division from its deployment to France, and by subsequent divisions on their arrival in France. So this equipment would have been seen with the Ross in late 1915 in all but the 1st Division. The last division to re-equip with 1908 web equipment was the 4th Division, which was still using the horrible Canadian 1916 dismounted equipment on the Somme, but would soon see it replaced as well. So this time frame of late 1915 also matches two other aspects, notably before the issue of steel helmets, but during the issue of the PH hood. As mentioned, this had been issued from mid-1915, and was an improvement over the earlier hypo or smoke helmet, as it was proof against phosgene gas, not just chlorine. A detailed description is given in a previous two-part video on shooting with anti-gas equipment of the Great War. But suffice it to say, it was a chemical-soaked bag, made of flannelette, which was pulled over the head and tucked into the collar. In my limited and admittedly non-lethal usages of this item, I can attest that it is extremely uncomfortable if any effort is required. Gas was eventually used in an offensive capacity by the BEF in September of 1915 at the Battle of Loos. Although none of the Canadian divisions took part, the PH hood was used extensively during the flawed conduct of that battle. Prior to an attack made by the 7th Battalion King's Own Scottish Borderers, the men became uneasy, suffering from their own gas and enemy artillery. To help the spirit of the men, a piper, Daniel Laidlaw, pushed back his PH helmet in order to play his pipes. He played back and forth along the parapet and steadied the men, which enabled them to launch their attack. Laidlaw would later be awarded the Victoria Cross for his actions, his turned-up gas helmet serving as an inspiration for this project. If you'd like to support the channel, please stop by our Patreon page. The link is in the description below. For more information on projects and updates between videos, follow us on our Facebook page. What was once Utreon is now Player. It still remains a good alternative to YouTube and Patreon, as those platforms have become rather troublesome for content as found on this channel. May I suggest following British muzzleloaders there as well. If you'd like to view British muzzleloaders and many other channels in an ad-free environment free from the content restraints of YouTube and other platforms, then I might suggest you head on over to History of Weapons and War, where you can subscribe and find this channel and many like it, presented as they should be, all in one place.